Southfield Redevelopment Authority Board of Directors. The first item on the agenda is the minutes from the December 5th, 2018 meeting.
Move they be approved. Yeah, actually, there's, I think, might need one adjustment on the public comments on topics discussed in the meeting. It says Joe Shea of Abington. So Tom Berkeley did not show at Abington's December 5th. Wasn't it November 5th?
No, actually, just through you, Madam Chair, I think Mr. Shea brought up at the last meeting that I did not attend the last Abington Planning Board. I didn't confirm it, which he agreed. But then I mentioned that night I was actually supposed to be there November 5th, but they didn't confirm. It's worth noting we both confirmed for this January 7th.
Okay.
Did I clarify?
Yeah, it's just listed as December 5th instead of November 5th in the minutes. That's it.
Thank you.
Right, so we'll make that correction. Any additional changes to the minutes? We have a motion to approve the minutes. Do I have a second?
Motion to approve with corrections.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Tony abstaining. The next item on the agenda is an applicable subdivision board performance bond reduction request for Winter Woods, which is Brookfield Village. And we received a letter this afternoon from the residents of Brookfield Village. I'll let Jim speak on this, but I think we'll likely be tabling this and looking into some additional issues on the performance bond.
Yeah, I did have a chance to read through the letter we received this afternoon. There are several items that are tied to the bond, as well as several that are not tied to the bond. So I would like to have the opportunity to work with the residents and kind of clarify some of the issues and drill down a little bit and see where we are on everything. So it will be my recommendation to take this back for your next meeting on the 16th.
Okay, and in the interim, can you set up a time to sort of meet with the residents or a representative or two of the residents?
Yes, I'll probably coordinate with Ms. Bessler on
Okay,
that and set up a time for hopefully early next week.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the treasurer's report, and we have a few items under this, so I'll turn it over to Eric Hart.
Good evening and Happy New Year, everybody. The first item on the agenda is we had gone out and had an audit done by a new firm this year, Lynch Marini and Associates. And tonight, as you had asked for membership from them to come forward and speak with you, we have Rob Lynch, who has 30 years of experience in governmental audits and accounting, as well as Grady Connor, who comes to us with 20 years of experience, also in a concentration in governmental accounting. They did a very in-depth audit, which I'm assuming that you would be expecting. Much more deeper than we've ever had since I've seen in any of your audit reports here. And they're here to speak to it, and you'd allow them to come before you and speak.
Great.
Thank you, Madam. This is talking here.
That's fine, wherever you're comfortable.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you to the board and the authority for the opportunity for us to do the audit. Thank you, Eric. You took away the first part of my introduction to the firm. But we're Lynch Marini and Associates. We have offices in Norwell as well as Natick, and we've been doing municipal audits for quite some time. Eric mentioned 30+ years. The firm itself has been doing it longer. We currently do about 20 municipal audits on an annual basis, of counties, towns, retirement systems, authorities, regional school districts, water and sewer districts, charter schools, etc. We take pride in the work that we do on our audit. We go above the audit procedures. We have a clean peer review. Our peer reviewers make comments that we're doing more work above what's required under the professional standards. If that's a choice that we make, our firm values. We did complete the audit, as Eric mentioned. We issued drafts to management. We sat down and reviewed the reports with management in detail. And they've accepted the reports and we finalized those. In the fiscal year 2018, GASB 75 was required to be implemented, which expanded the other post-employment benefits liability and to be fully recognized on the financial statements.
And I presented, and I believe it was in the packet, an overview of the audit process for the presentation tonight. And the purpose of a financial statement audit is for the auditor to conduct an audit of the financial statements in accordance with generally accepted government auditing standards, commonly referred to as the OLA, to express opinions on the financial statements. We issue reports as a result of our audit that was conducted. We report on the financial statements and give opinions on the various opinion units of the authority. And we issue a report on internal control over financial reporting compliance and other matters, just commonly referred to as the OLA report. Management's responsibility, as well as those charged with governance, include the financial statement preparation and disclosures in accordance with GAAP and GASB, Governmental Accounting Standards Board, sets the financial reporting requirements for municipalities. The auditors, as is common with many municipalities, we do assist with the preparation of the financial statements, the notes, and the required supplementary information in accordance with GAAP. Any proposed journal entries are presented to management and agreed upon and accepted. Responsibilities also include the design, implementation, and maintenance of internal controls and helping ensure appropriate goals and objectives are met. Compliance with appropriate laws, regulations, contracts, and agreements, and to prevent and detect fraud and ensure management and financial information is reliable and properly reported. Those are your responsibilities. Our responsibility is to express opinions on the financial statements. In order to do that, we perform procedures to obtain audit evidence about amounts and disclosures in the financial statements in order to express opinions. We report on deficiencies in financial reporting and internal controls and other matters deemed to be material or significant, and report on other matters deemed important to be reported to the governing body. We use professional judgment to determine if the financial statements are fairly stated in all material respects and or misleading to users or other matters. The financial statements themselves, there's two sets of financial statements: the government-wide financial statements, which would include the governmental activities and the business type activities, here the water and sewer fund, enterprise fund that was previously established. And that's on a full accrual basis. It reports all assets, obligations, deferred outflows, and inflows. On a government-wide basis, there was a $907,000 unrestricted deficit net position. That was due mainly in part to the reporting this year of the full OPEB liability of $593,000 and the net pension liability of $647,000. It does include $40 million of capital assets, as well as the 2010 infrastructure bond at approximately $12 million outstanding. The other set of financial statements is the fund basis statements, and the funds are reported as major or non-major. The general fund, which is your main operating fund, is always reported as a major fund. And then in addition to that, the reserve fund and the parkway maintenance fund were also reported as major funds. And the governmental funds are reported on the modified accrual basis. That's similar to US Uniform Modified Massachusetts Accounting System, just how you report to the DOR. And includes notes as well as required supplementary information. On a fund basis, the general fund had an aggregate fund balance of $750,000. That includes the stabilization funds that you've set up. For the general stabilization of approximately $402,000 and the OPEB stabilization of approximately $299,000. You had assigned $350,000 for your 2019 operating budget as the board voted. The results of our audit, there are 6 opinion units. We have 3 unmodified opinions on the reserve fund, the parkway maintenance fund, and the other governmental funds, the rest of the information. We have 2 qualified opinions for the governmental funds and the general fund, and that was due to contingent liability with the Commonwealth on the parkway bond. That's currently, they've certified it through June 30, 2013. But in our opinion, under GAAP, full liability should be reported or calculated, and that liability is yet to be calculated. So that's not reflected in the financial statements. And then with the changes in the water and sewer fund, as I mentioned, the board had previously been treating us as an enterprise fund. And there's some changes this year. The audit information that we had, we didn't see any formal commitments. There were billing reports maintained from July through October. And then there was a verbal agreement, there was no formal agreement to transfer the operations or the administration operations, the billing and whatnot, to the town of Weymouth. So the activity, because there was no formal agreements, the activity was not reflected in the financial statements of the authority. In our opinion, we weren't able to determine, if all activity was accurate, so we did have a disclaimer of opinion there. We did have a yellow book, on our yellow book report, we did identify some material weaknesses, again, related to the water and sewer fund, the calculation of the parkway maintenance liability, lack of segregation of duties. May seem obvious, you've got a very small office, therefore there's some incompatible duties being done, primarily in the financial end of things. So from an audit standpoint, we identify that as a weakness. And then some other items related to the financial management system. And we've discussed these with management and discussed ways to make improvements in those. Some other matters we reported was on the OPEB trust, and so the board has addressed that. And then also just recommending establishing some documented policies and procedures and formalized risk assessments and inclusive of a fraud policy. And all these things aren't going to happen overnight, especially given the size of the staff, but we can certainly continue to work with management to address these issues. And that's an overview. I can answer any questions if anybody has any, or we're always available to talk at another time.
Do you have any suggestions on how other organizations with small staffs manage the sort of duties overlap issue?
It's putting different checks and balances in place. Again, it's kind of tough, 2.5 people. As things go down the road, that may change a little bit. But it's just having at least, maybe some control over the board, a representative of the board that could review information, reconciliations. But just having, like on the cash reconciliations, having someone else take a look at those. So there's not just one person doing it and say, yes, it's been reconciled.
But our legislation inhibits us from actively managing as board members, so there's this ugly balance of an informal check and balance.
Right.
And you're correct about the example of the billing with Weymouth. It was just it was not documented. It was just make it happen. For good and bad.
Yeah.
Definite big value to it, but it wasn't documented. Thank you for your efforts. I appreciate the thoroughness of the evaluation. We needed that.
I think this is much more thorough than what we've seen before, so we appreciate your work. Yes.
If there's nothing further with them, I'd just like to say thank you very much. They did such a thorough job, and they did make quite a bit of recommendations, and they continue to work with me throughout the year anytime I need assistance. They have given us some ideas of what we can do, but since you've got basically a half a person in your financial staff, segregation of duties is a little difficult. I leave the bank statement folders available for management to take a look at. The executive director is always available in here and able to look at anything that we have. And the board reviews both of our warrants. I don't know how much more I can really accomplish with being part-time.
No, I hear you on that. I mean, for better or for worse, we have a relatively simple both income and expenditures. From having reviewed all the warrants throughout the year, it's not terribly complex.
Another area that I want to work into with this was one of the largest items that they had brought attention to was the enterprise fund. And with that, we'd like to formalize another MOA with them. And Jim has been working very hard.
With Weymouth, correct?
Yes, with Weymouth in order to develop a new version of that that better suits where we need to head with that. And it's extremely complicated and takes into consideration much more than I was aware of as far as regulatory agencies and water.
That's
Out of
why
my
sort of
scope.
when we had the urgent need to switch over billing, we did not finalize it because we were not able to come to agreement on all of the material terms of it, and we were not able to take care of all of the regulatory issues that I think, some of which we have to deal with the state, I believe.
And there are massive developer issues within that document as well.
So we sort of need all parties at the table before we can finalize that, but I do, continue to be appreciative that Weymouth hazarded moving forward with that agreement and has continually both provided water and billed the residents at the same rate as Weymouth. I think it's been pretty seamless. Everyone can set up online portals now. It's great. And they continue to do that, and we have no reason to believe they'll stop that, but it may be some time before we're able to finalize that, I think.
The other item that I wanted to mention to you is the fact that we had retained earnings of $823,000. There is, I believe, a description of this on one of the pages in my section there. We had reserved $8,000, if you have remembered, for testing for fiscal 19 that we're in right now, which gave us a certified retained earnings of $815,000. We do have sewer connection fees in there for 17 and 18 of $319,000 and $24,000, which we will be transmitting back to Weymouth per our agreement with them on the sewer connections. We also have an encumbrance that we need for a Pompeo contract to, I guess we're doubling up on the ability to supply water to the residents here over on Trotter Road. I know that Jim will be getting into that a little further.
By doubling up, you mean putting in the loop?
Yes, correct. So I know Jim wanted to talk that a little more in depth afterwards, but I wanted to make you aware financially of where that puts us with a remaining balance of about $400,000 in the enterprise fund after all those items. The other thing that I wanted to bring to your attention is since it was brought up by the auditors about formalizing commitments and abatements, I've taken the liberty of actually formalizing the commitments for both the assessment and the district taxes, and they're before you. Briefly, there's special assessments of $195,000, if you recall from the revenue estimates that we had, that goes towards our 2010 A bond, as well as there's district taxes of $162,000 to the 3 towns. They're all individually broken out into the commitments here, as well as if you need the backup for it individually by parcel, it's available in the folder in front of you. I'm looking for someone to make a motion. I put it before.
Before we do that, I just want to make sure, since we do have people standing tonight, that anyone step in and not block the door. It's just important that we have the door clear.
I have given the motion to Mr. Donovan, and what I'm looking for is a motion to approve the commitment of special assessments in the amount of $195,000.01, and a motion to approve the commitment of fiscal 2019 district taxes in the amount of $162,063.54.
So moved.
Second. Any discussion on the motions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstaining, thank you for formalizing that, Eric.
You're welcome. And that's it for me.
Next item is the executive director's report, and this includes the ratification of the contract that Eric had alluded to, so I'll let Paul or Jim, as appropriate, speak on this issue. This relates back to, we had discussed that there was some unfinished work that L-Star was supposed to complete, and there were various public safety and public interest reasons why this needed done before any deep freeze, and I'll let Paul elaborate.
Yeah, I think it's great to start with that. So we did have the issue of a water main connection work that had been done, and we were at risk of losing some of the benefits of the work that had already been done due to weather-related issues if we didn't close on it. We worked closely with the town of Weymouth and decided to sort of execute that contract and get that work done. there's been a little bit of back and forth, things are never really where you think they are, you know, when you start digging. But that contract we put out for about $69,000, Jim's been doing a great job to sort of put it up and oversee that, so if there are any specific questions about that, we're here to answer it, otherwise ratification of that action would be good.
Is the work finished now, or where are we? in
It's
the work?
ongoing, we expect to finish by the end of this week, actually, and have it paved over, by week's end.
But I will just add that it's
Is
important.
this something that we can recoup from L-Star?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, or massive developer down the road. It's one of, one of the biggest issues on the audit was the ambiguity of that water and sewer money. But, clearly we were able to use some of that for this particular purpose. And that was really why we were keeping on the water side, some of those funds held in escrow until we had more detailed settlement. So I think we were really fortunate to be in that position.
It was really the next critical, water infrastructure project that has needed to happen for quite some time. And as we've outlined in previous meetings, that just has not happened through the master developer's efforts. But being able to have a supplemental, secondary feed into Union Point, water feed into Union Point is really critical, as well as just the overall water pressure and reliance within the system, which has been noted by, public safety officials in the past.
And Joe Shea, that's what Joe was talking about, or has talked about for the last 3 months.
Right.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
So that'll fix that issue.
That's right.
I think it's something that was commented on when there was the large fire in the condominiums last year, so it's great to sort of close the
So-
loop on
That's
that.
Well, just to be clear, so anyone can correct me if I'm wrong, but for everybody's benefit, this is an obligation of the master developer
Yes,
that has not been met because they're unable or unwilling,
yes,
in that we're now meeting because it's an issue of public safety,
yes,
as illustrated by a fire that had low water pressure.
yes.
It had also been started, and so some of the ground had been dug up and some
Right.
of the pipeline was open, which put us in a position where we were going to lose the work that had been done to date if we didn't finish it before we got to the deep freeze, bad snowstorm.
And is it an eyesore for the property, abutting property owners or anything at this point?
I think the abutting property is an eyesore.
Yeah.
It's by the postcard movie station,
No.
so that's its own eyesore.
Well, that might be changing soon too.
It may be, it may be, but, so, I asked and you said this is something we can recruit from the master developer going forward, so the next thing that, for example, the master developer or a subsequent developer came in front of us for, could we make repayment of this a condition?
Yes.
Okay.
And just for my background, so we were able to have some enterprise money on hand to use for this. What made this different than the money spent on the Tarcan outfall? That was a capital expenditure. I'm going back a couple of years, but I guess I'm just sort of thinking out loud here.
I think when we retained earnings in the enterprise fund, we had discussed sort of the acceptable uses of that, and the
Okay.
water piping
For post.
was the main thing that we said, and I think that the outfall drainage is a different type of issue than an enterprise
direct to
fund
an enterprise
plumbing
fund use.
sewer
Right.
issue.
Yeah, enterprise funds are collected through a fee, have to
To
be used.
maintain.
They have to be
expressly for a
used
particular
on-
purpose.
Yep, okay.
And there are larger issues too, there is other work that remains undone, but the cost of that is just too significant for us to sort of bring that burden on. So given the public safety issues at risk here, the risk of it becoming a more expensive project, and given the financial size of the project, it certainly made sense to move forward on this
Yeah,
one.
you would have lost the value of the work done to date, exactly. Okay.
So in the motion that's gonna be read, do we wanna add that the master developer and the next master developer will be responsible for reimbursing the enterprise fund for these, for this expenditure?
I'll be billing them.
Yeah. I think it would be better if we.
And if they don't
included
pay that bill, would that be a default under our agreement?
Yeah, this is clearly a pass-through cost, one
But
So
of
I
they'll
wouldn't-
have how
We
long
wanna- yeah.
to pay us once they're billed, what's our, 30 days?
30 days.
Yeah.
Do they even get 30 days here where they've forced us into this position to hazard this cost?
When does the clock start on this?
That's unclear.
I would assume once the project is completed and we get billed from them.
You have not been billed yet?
No.
Okay.
When they start an execution of the contract versus completion of the work. Either way, it's 30 days.
You know, as we discussed at the last meeting with some of the initial grounds for default, that there may be subsequent defaults that come up.
So
Some of them are financial in nature, and some of them that are becoming 30 days past due now are financial in nature, so there'll be additional defaults that go out that reference those accounts specifically.
At
They'll last
future
those
meetings,
years.
could we sort of get an update, maybe at each meeting, how much, at least on the financial side, how much default there is and how past due each one is? If that could just be sort of a recurring report on the agenda going forward until we are hopefully at a point where there isn't any past due money of any amount?
Roughly right now, they're past due on the first and second quarter of a couple $100,000, plus the initial half of the bond payment, which the first part of that's about $570,000. I am billing them currently for the next one, which will also be another $223,000 for the third and fourth quarter, as well as the second half of the payment for the bond would be about 1.1 million. So we're talking 1.3 million on this next bill here. Granted, we still are waiting to iron out whether or not things are going to happen with the state or not, but at a minimum, they are completely past due on the first and second quarter on their regular operational developer fees, and I'm going to be billing them probably tomorrow on the third and fourth quarter, which will be due, February 1st.
And I think the board will begin to see how interconnected a lot of the issues are that we're beginning to deal with. So you heard from the auditors tonight. The auditors have made some recommendations in that audit about how to move forward with certain things. Accounting for our potential liability on the capital side is one of those things that will influence the amount of the developer fee that we charge out. So next meeting, we'd like to present the draft redevelopment plan. Jim and Eric have done some excellent work there. I think it will give the board a very realistic sort of perspective on development, and it will be part of the calculation of the new state revenue that should put a number on what that deficiency payment might or might not be. So discussing the audit and some of the corrections that are suggested this week, discussing the draft redevelopment plan, those calculations of funds, which also interact with some of the reporting requirements that were part of the default issue, should start to make sense how really sort of interconnected all of these things are over the next few weeks.
Tom, do we have any timeline for payment of any of the outstanding?
We're making progress on the whole hearing of the default we did based on our last meeting, so I probably have a better update on the next meeting where I'm making some good progress.
And then I would just, to finish my report, just reference that we are having conversations and there's activity between L-Star as a master developer and the SRA staff as it relates to some of those issues of default. So there is some information starting to flow back and forth, so that's positive. I mentioned the redevelopment plan. I don't know if I mentioned it last meeting or not, but I did have an opportunity to go to an Opportunity Zone conference in Lowell 3 weeks ago, and more, I think we should really be paying attention to the potential for opportunity zones to impact the Rockland and Abington sections of the project moving forward. So there'll be more on that as we move in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Great, so to close the loop on the contract, will make a motion that the Board of Directors ratify the contract between the Authority and Rudy V. Pompeo, Inc., dated December 7th, 2018, hereby noting the public convenience and necessity therefore, and also exempting said transaction from Chapter 30B of the general laws, and that the board hereby authorizes a transfer of $69,150 from the unreserved enterprise fund balance for this project.
I'll second that, but if I could add the words public safety in front of public convenience. Public safety and public convenience,
Yeah.
under the law, is
Yeah.
two different.
Thank you.
Any further discussion on this? All those in favor of the motion as amended to add public safety?
Aye.
Opposed, abstaining, that's unanimous. Thank you. There are no topics not reasonably anticipated 48 hours in advance of the meeting, so I'll now open to public comment on issues discussed at tonight's meeting. Yes.
Hi, Steve Lamont, 16 Thistle Lane. I just had a follow-up question to the last item we were discussing, that being the loop water main connection, which is for safety purposes. Are there any other projects that have similar safety concerns, such as, I'll mention one that I don't know whose domain it falls in, is the pump house, which doesn't have a backup generator, has a door off now. And it's a very vulnerable thing, because you get backup sewage in the cottages. So I didn't know what the status was of that.
That's something.
We can discuss it later, but are there any others similar?
Yeah, this is something that's kind of been out there for a while. I don't know if we have any update on this, but I think it's something All-Star was supposed to
Yeah, I'm happy
do.
Just stand up so you can see, through you to Mr. Mullin, the water main, I just wanna address, if I could just go back to answer one of the board members' question. It isn't that we're not willing to do it, is that water loops started along with the pump station, or upgrades to the pump station. A lot of that work started over the summer, and as you know, because of the injunction, the funding was frozen, so we're not able to fund that project. That, the water one being one of them. The electric.
Wasn't it funded before the injunction though? Shouldn't you have allocated the cost?
Absolutely, yeah.
So it was improperly funded to begin with,
Correct.
and now you can't properly fund it.
Correct. And the same with Mr. Lamont's question in terms of the pump station. There are upgrades to the pump station that are required. There are new impellers that are required. There's a whole series of things. There's a backup generator that is sitting in the contractor's yard that needs to be funded. So he's absolutely right. There is work that needs to be done there. Apparently there was a backup generator there at one point, but a couple of years ago, I don't know where it went. Apparently somebody sold it or something, the previous master developer. So I don't know, but that is a requirement. And again, that work is fully funded, but frozen at the moment. So happy to talk with the,
Is it a safety hazard?
I would, it's definitely an inconvenience hazard that, if we've had a problem in the past where it,
I mean, it is, I would say,
Yeah,
public
I would say
health,
yes.
health,
Yes.
it's a public health
yes,
issue.
oh yeah, yes.
The last time it backed up, the
Yes.
residents' basements filled with raw sewage.
Yeah, so
What's the value of that contract that needs to be fulfilled to complete that work, do you know, offhand?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I can get that information for you.
And the follow-up is
First
in
thing
it.
tomorrow.
And I would say the other follow-up would be what, like, the most urgent, sort of the backup generator on it, what's the cost of that piece of the work?
I have all that, I just don't have it off the top of my
Okay,
head. Happy
if
to
you
do-
could coordinate with Jim on
Yeah.
that and,
It seems pretty important.
It's
Yeah,
all
absolutely.
tied to the Phase 1A bond reduction that you approved quite some time ago, that none of that remaining punch list work has been completed. And that's the most critical piece.
and so that bond money has not been released?
You had approved a reduction to a certain point, but the remaining work, which includes installation of the generator, has not been completed.
Can we pull the
Can we
bond?
pull from the
Yeah.
bond?
Can we pull the bond?
We're getting close on that.
What is
Getting
the,
close on that.
where's the, how close? Like, where's the-
I'll have to look to see what the date, if there was a date certain.
Well,
on that.
conversely, would it be a legitimate use of an enterprise fund and bill back to the bond?
Well, it's good.
Potentially, I'd say this, there are a list of projects where there's uncompleted work, or work that needs to be done that L-Star isn't able to do currently because of the injunction.
So can we
But
prioritize what we see
this
as
is public
public health?
safety, public health.
Public health.
And on those issues that have been related to public safety or public health, we've worked really closely with the town of Weymouth on it to prioritize those projects and to look, and Jim's done a good job of sort of estimating the cost of some of those, and so we moved on the one that was most urgent. But we'd be happy to evaluate those projects and maybe bring them forward to the board in a couple of weeks.
We like the idea that you know that there are projects out there that
Yeah,
are
we-
public safety, and you're
we do.
prioritizing, you're working on it. So
Yeah.
you're in process.
Right, we're looking at, the last thing we wanna do is leave us with too little in case there's another emergency, there's an actual
Yeah.
emergency on site,
Absolutely.
particularly where this authority is responsible currently for all the O and M on the
So
site.
finding out that bond
Yeah, and there-
maturity date.
Well, there are other sort of issues too, depending on which project it is, right? Because there are some issues on White Street with uncompleted sort of electrical work that's outstanding, but the town of Weymouth actually has a bond on that, which they've actually activated.
Calling one.
Okay. So, you know, each project has a little different sort of
story.
financial structure behind it, but we could try to put that in list form, prioritize it, and give you an update status.
I'm working on, with my private life, you know, a subdivision, the insurance on the subdivision, that it's similar problems, part of it's completed, part of it's not, and they had issues with some of the sump pumps and the piece there. What we did as a solution to the problem is, you know, we just information out to all the residents, to put an endorsement on their particular policies for water and sewer backup, and what the provision is, give an outline. I'll gladly put that together and send it to you, what we have done. And then you can make the suggestion to, of course, that's not the solution, that's their own personal piece, but they can at least have some coverage for that water and sewer backup for damage that may come in, if that were to happen, so,
Yeah. Let's see if we can organize some of that information for you.
yeah. And then you have to make a determination of, do you wanna be that source of information for everything, and then now you're screwing the line. If you do it for one issue, do you have to do it for all?
Well, so it gets back to some of the ambiguity around, you know, the enterprise funds and the transmission of that and the legislation, right? So the legislation was set up so that the ability for the towns to recoup property tax was dependent on their changing zoning, but also dependent on their accepting infrastructure, responsibility for some of the infrastructure. That never happened in a detailed way, you know, it still hasn't. But the property tax has been shifted. So that's really where this enterprise account is getting so stuck in the middle. And it's exactly why there's some ambiguity on who would be next in line to perform some of these critical infrastructure projects if the master developer is unable. But I think we're doing a pretty good job in an ad hoc way trying to sort of do that. So we can give you more information going forward on it. But it starts to hint to where we might go from here too. You know, because there is a much needed sewer project, sewer expansion project, increased capacity here at site, that, you know, is a little bit over $2.5 million. So it's, you know, that's down the road. We have that also that we're considering as a potential thing that we would wanna do, even if the master developer were sort of unable to perform. So we'll put together the short list of outstanding issues, and we think we can sort of list some of the criteria that we've used too, that has to do with sort of an amount as a percentage of total reserves, and then whether it's public health, public safety issue. And we'll give that information to you and allow us to have I think a more comprehensive discussion about how the SRA might be able to move forward with that sort of second tier responsibility for the capital infrastructure.
Can you also include that, as you mentioned, how much you think is reasonable to put it on an emergency fund?
Yeah.
And obviously play it on worst case scenario, best case scenario.
Right.
The salient point being, once again, that the master developer is unable to perform.
Yeah.
And I appreciate Mr. Berkeley's correction, because I think his intentions are honorable, but it changes nothing in that the master developer is unable to perform.
Yeah, but, and I would call the board's attention to the state auditor's report from last March 15th, right, where the major sort of outstanding issue was the SRA's contingency plan in the case of the master developer not being able to perform. And so we've spent a lot of time on that. And so where I think last March we were kind of like, I don't know, you know, what is our wagon so hitched that we don't have any other options? I think we've worked hard at sort of understanding our responsibility and identifying resources that be able to continue to execute our responsibility in that situation where they are unable to perform. So no matter whether it's Elstar or someone else, you're still dealing with a private corporation, right? That you have ceded, the legislation has ceded an incredible amount of responsibility to an ownership. And so anything can happen to a private corporation. There's just not the level of public accountability, transparency. It's subject to sort of these exogenous global influences of the global economy, the national economy. So we have to be able to be agile enough as the public agency on the other side to be able to stabilize this project in a time where the master developer is not gonna be able to perform. So regardless of the circumstances that we're under currently, I mean, that was really the charge last March 15th, and I think we're doing a pretty good job at stepping in.
I agree.
Follow-up question, is there a state public health violation on that pump station right now?
So the requirement of the backup generator is a requirement that we placed on them as part of the bond reduction rather than some statutorily or code required.
Secondary power can be provided. There was some different options for secondary power within our subdivision rules and regulations, which include either a stationary or portable generator. So that was a requirement of the subdivision approval.
And there's no form of backup power at this point.
No, other than bringing in a portable generator from off-site versus one that's on-site or a stationary one that's on-site.
Any additional questions, comments? Yes?
Hi, Brittany Bessler, 10 Skyhawk. I have two questions. My first question is about the pump house work that we were just talking about. As everyone hopefully here knows, Brookfield Village has one way in and one way out. The pump house happens to be in that location. I just want to make sure that, you know, public safety is a concern at that point when work gets done, that it does not block the entrance for the residents, because it has been blocked in recent times, and I can't get home. So that's not fun at the end of the day. My second question is, can I ask a question about item number 3, or?
Yeah, I'll let you ask a question.
Okay.
And if anything gets too far out again,
Sure.
we might bring it back and we may not answer the question. It may just be added to the list of things we look into before the next meeting.
Perfect. I just want to say that I do appreciate the opportunity to work with Jim and speak with him about the agenda item number 3. I was really just wondering, in a more general sense, of if somebody can give me a high-level overview of how this bonding procedure works, and more specifically, whether or not residents are routinely offered the opportunity to have this sort of discussion prior to a vote of releasing bond payments.
So some of them are really easy, right? I mean, some of them are on street work, and Jim will go through usually with the town of Weymouth, because we want to make sure that these are built in a way that at some point down the road, no pun intended, Weymouth will accept the various road work back here. And they're relatively straightforward. Recently, I think we've had more problems with some of these, and we have engaged, I know, in dialogue with Dorset Park in the past, and then now this one's coming up. I'll let Jim go into sort of more specifics on his process, but we typically do.
Yeah, generally, the bond is related to the future public improvements or public maintenance areas such as the detention areas, okay, where there may be an easement to allow the public entity to maintain, if that's really the agreement that's set up for that particular subdivision. So some of it depends on the nature of the subdivision and what the future ownership is going to be of the infrastructure, but generally, the bond is protecting the public body, the planning board, and ultimately, in this case, we have 2 obligees on the bond. We have the authority acting as the planning board, but we also have the town of Weymouth acting as the municipality that is required to accept those ways when they're complete under the legislation. So my process is sort of two-pronged, not only looking at it to protect the authority as the planning board, but also coordinating with the town of Weymouth, who actually provides the inspectional services on site, who are gonna have to accept that at the end of the day. So there's a lot of coordination behind the scenes to review the initial bond amount as well as the reductions and the completion of the process. Now, what we've seen in phase 1A, for example, where we brought up the pump station, you have infrastructure that was completed many years ago that is still under private ownership. And now you have issues that have come up which are more maintenance related, but that punch list is just getting longer and longer and longer. So the ultimate acceptance of that road now becomes even more complicated than it might have been 3 or 4 years ago, where you had less issues on the project. So that's something we've been wrestling with here, just the amount of time that has gone by. Paul mentioned the fact that the town of Weymouth is required to accept these ways as of January 1st, 2015. Folks, that was 4 years ago. And it still hasn't happened, so we're definitely in limbo on some of this, unfortunately. With the Winter Woods project, Brookfield Village, that might be really the first good test case for this process. Now that we're getting towards the completion of construction, and hopefully the street acceptance process will be a fairly quick process compared to what has not happened in the last 4 years.
I would just add, because I think I know where Britt's going on this. In general, when there's been an approval of a project and there are conditions attached to it, some of those conditions would require the developer to issue a bond in case certain things aren't done. The punch list that is then associated with the release of those funds, in a general sense, that's usually a judgment made by professional staff. And the reason for that is that if every sort of reduction of that bond were subject to a public meeting or the board approval, you would be more likely to have outstanding issues that may be used as leverage for other issues that aren't subject to that particular bond. And if the board were to vote on that inappropriately, it would subject the board to financial liability. So that's why some of the decision-making process.
You might give an example of what would be a punch list item versus what would be a bond item.
Yeah.
Just as a,
But I think Britt's sort of comment in general about how many bonds do we have outstanding, what are the punch lists associated with them, and what's the status over time is something that we could report on a more regular basis on. And that might at least give everyone a clear idea as to where we are on some of the outstanding bonds.
Can I comment on that?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Nick Burr, I'm also a Brookfield Village resident. And so I agree with Britt's comment, it would be great to sort of have an understanding, because part of what's happening now is we also, as residents, are having separate interactions with Pulte.
Yes.
The reason being that we've brought up specific public safety and public health concerns. So for example, I live very close to the pond that might have been mentioned in the letter. We had to fight very hard with Pulte just to get a fence built around this, because that was a public safety concern for our children, and there are other written commitments that we have currently that are not fulfilled, for example, landscaping, that sort of thing. And so it would be great to have a sort of coordination of the written commitments that Pulte has given to us and their performance commitments.
Yeah, no, and that part of the reason for a more coordinated approach is that there are these conversations that happen that sometimes the SRA isn't a party to, and we might be persuasive as a partner in some of those
It
discussions.
would be great to have that sort of support.
Do SRA or any other entity needs anything from Brookfield Village residents for taking over the street? Do they need anything from us which can initiate or speed up the process of taking over the streets by Weymouth Town?
They haven't been taking them today, we're willing to give them any day. I've told them any day we'll give them.
Yes, good. That would reduce the cost of,
Right.
that's the whole idea,
Right.
right?
I
Once
think
it is
it's-
taken over by the town.
I think it's very helpful to have the public dialogue, and
And I mean, remember that the public officials in the town are elected, so you can always feel free to reach out in groups or alone to any of your elected officials and sort of put on pressure there. I think, we put on the pressure we can at various different points, but I think it's useful to remind elected officials sometimes that they're elected and that this is important, so I would encourage anyone to make that an issue for the voters here.
And vote.
And vote.
Register and vote.
And just to
So
do a
as
public
residents
service
put together
announcement
a
for,
petition,
the public service announcement for Weymouth is, you are Weymouth residents. There are a lot of unaccepted streets in Weymouth, I'll give you that heads up. And one of the ups and downs is that because the streets in here are not accepted, it is not an alternate route for Route 18 traffic. So you don't have signage on Route 18 telling people cut through Union Point because these streets are not accepted by the town. So that's kind of a minor plus.
It was one silver lining this year, is we did not become the official Route 18 detour because the streets were not yet accepted.
Yeah, Pond Street people are making their own signs saying direct link.
But acceptance of street is a huge issue within the entire town of Weymouth.
Yes, Mary?
Rockland and Abington were mentioned about doing something for Rockland and Abington, but what I'd like to know is, has the court taken off that limit for Elstar to be able to sell, not be able to sell land over $25,000, or an asset over $25,000
No,
in value? So if, has it been lifted?
No.
no.
No? So then, how are you gonna do something for Rockland and Abington?
I think Paul's looking to the future beyond.
I'm looking to the future. There's also a discussion about which parcels have been properly collateralized. So there may be parcels out there that may not be properly encumbered.
What, you mean transferred property?
For clarification of ownership, is it tied up in the master or not?
Well, there's some land that hasn't been transferred from the Navy.
Right. So
But
there's
according
still-
to the Navy, the other land's been transferred. A lot of the land's been transferred.
I think when we start to get into the specific details of the default, one of the primary concerns will be the discussion of which parcels have been properly collateralized. There are different, the different parcels came through at different times, there are different issues
Right.
and different deeds and different obligations, so we're gonna have to go through that parcel by parcel, and it's, I think there may be some Rockland Abington parcels that have not been properly collateralized. But I think that's for a future discussion.
But that might be before Elstar even.
Yeah, there are some outstanding obligations up there.
Any additional comments? Seeing none, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
When's our
Oh,
next meeting?
our next meeting is 2 weeks from today, January 16th, 2019. Motion to adjourn. All those in favor? Aye.